Hello, everybody. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see Maria as well from the Manchester Museum. And also, hello to all your pets who've been keeping you sane. This is my dog looking in on Zoom. Pets, dogs, cats, ferrets, all welcome. It's lovely to see so many people here. As you know, today's history talk is about the once hugely popular so-called Disneyland of Manchester, as Bernard mentioned, Belle Vue near Gorton, and some of its more famous stars like Maharaja the elephant. This is 1960s. I imagine around Easter time, I'm not sure, but I mean, it's very busy. Some of you, like Philip, will probably remember this. Belle Vue is really remembered for its entertainment, Speedway, wonderful creatures like the Tigon, which was a combination of a tiger and a lion, and its most famous resident, Maharaja, who is now in Manchester Museum, looked after by Maria Jose. So Maharaja is as popular with Mancunians now as he was when he first arrived, and everyone wanted to help the game elephant cool down after walking from Edinburgh to Manchester in 1872. He walked all that way in 10 days. He had to walk as he was chucked off the railways after wrecking his carriage. Naughty elephant. Here he is opening up a railway gate. He was very helpful. That's Lorenzo with him. But as they say, never mind bull in a china shop, never let an elephant into your train compartment. Maharaja was employed giving rides at a penny a passenger, and in Manchester Museum, he is preserved as a mark of affection by all the people he gave joy to with his rides and presents. He's a bit worn out now, as you can see, by the busy job that he had, but he's enjoying his retirement. He actually died in 1882 from pneumonia, and the tales of his greatness are still told today by his descendants to any member of the public willing to listen. There you go, you see his descendants telling great stories of Maharaja. Belle Vue closed nearly 50 years ago, but it's very much in the hearts of Mancunians, as we've already heard. It's still fondly remembered by many throughout the north. Even I remember visiting as a boy whilst I were being dragged up in Blackburn, Lancashire. Blackpool and Belle Vue provided twin visions of glamour, sparkle, and fun in a grim northern town. Now, nobody had much money, but it seems people could always work out a way to save up enough for the much visited break in Belle Vue. And here you can see the friendly shopkeeper who's helping them to get the money together. You might remember the happy childhood days taking the 57 bus. Don't know if you remember this. Before that, it was a tram. Look at that lovely old tram and the smart guys in the uniforms. Not sure where this was. Could be Gorton. And then, even before that, 1920s. Look at these. High Denton, Belle Vue, Albert Square. There's the Clippy. Now, you and your family may have visited the circus, theme park, zoo, and as adults, evenings of dancing, music gigs and sports like boxing and wrestling. From the late 1920s until the outbreak of the Second World War, Belle Vue was the boxing mecca of Europe. Bouts were held in the King's Hall, and although popularity declined in the years following the war, Belle Vue staged a televised World Championship fight in 1964 between Terry Downs and Willie Pastrano. And of course, Henry Cooper used to train there, although he was from London. So here's a wrestling bill, which was at King's Hall. I think that chap is called Kendo Nagasaki. A lot of people might remember seeing the wrestling on Saturdays on the telly. And you can see Big Daddy and the Bruiser there. The first wrestling contest took place in the King's Hall on 15th of December 1930 and was a hugely popular attraction. Except for a break during the Second World War, events continued to be held until 1981. And they were watched by up to 5,000 spectators in the hall and probably millions outside, on the telly at home. Popular performers included Jack Pye, Big Daddy, Giant Haystacks, and it was the UK's premier site for bouts like Battle of the Supersized Giants, Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks. So, amazing place for sports. Here are some pictures of the good times enjoyed outside until everything started closing down. The zoo closed down first in 1977, then the amusement park shut down in 1980. Now, this is the bit of the ride, you might remember, where you start to regret overdoing the candy floss, ice cream, and the fairground treats. The Greyhound racing track, which started in 1926, only closed last August, a victim of lockdown, of COVID, like so many things. So that's finally gone to the dogs. You know, by the way, after the first boring week of being stuck at home for lockdown, my dog looked at me as if to say, "Now you know why I chew the furniture." He didn't really. Can I ask if anyone here, well, you can put your hands up if you want, ever visited the Belle Vue Gardens or Zoo and later the wrestling, music gigs, brass band competitions or Speedway? If you have, you can talk about it straight after this talk. There were huge numbers of people, over 100,000 in a day sometimes on bank holidays. And it's just down the road, you know, just in Chorlton. Now, Belle Vue was originally known, can you see all these huge numbers of people waiting to queue up? And I think it might be the 1950s or even the 40s from what you can see of the clothing there, all trying to get into Belle Vue. Originally, Belle Vue was known as a pleasure garden. Pleasure gardens were created all over the country in the 1800s at a time before mass entertainment, when for most people a holiday only amounted to one day off a week. And of course, travel was for the very rich, so you needed somewhere close by for your recreation. Belle Vue was opened in December 1837. Quite a while ago, isn't it? But it wasn't even the first pleasure garden in Manchester. That was called Tinker's Garden. And here you can see the Tinkers, although they're quite posh Tinkers, aren't they? And quite a dangerous kind of platform, a raised platform, wooden platform that they were dancing on. This was on the banks of the River Irk in the then high class and very elegant area of Collyhurst, which has changed a little bit since then. Cost of entry in 1812 was 1 shilling and 6pence, a huge sum when the average wage was only £30 a year for a skilled tradesman and only £6 a year for a housemaid. By the end of the 18th century, the population had grown from 10,000 to nearly 700,000 people, thanks to Manchester's role as the hub of the British cotton industry. And so they needed many more recreational venues, and that's why, of course, Belle Vue was created. The opening of Belle Vue in 1836 really shook things up and democratized entry by making it much cheaper. That's another lovely example of the wonderful, embracing spirit of Manchester, always looking out for the ordinary folk. People were not much different from today, though. See the chap in the bowler hat? He was obviously dragged along by his wife, and he's looking towards the pub's opening in Gorton, as I understand. Also, just like days out today, binge drinking was often a problem, and the cult of celebrity was always present. Becoming a style icon was something to which many young women aspired, so they dressed up to be seen at these gardens. At Belle Vue from 1830s right through to the 1980s, they had the kind of celebrity culture that we know today, where newspapers, magazines, you know, people in hair salons, supermarkets, they all know the tittle-tattle and the minutest details of so-called celebrities. The gardens was a place for ordinary people to dress up to the nines in order to stroll and be seen, and hope to see the famous and infamous of the day, like actors, actresses, figures like Wellington, royalty, and even characters like Dick Turpin. In more recent times, people like this visited Belle Vue. Do you recognize them? This chap is from northern Manchester, I think. Davy Jones, I'm sure you recognize him, don't you? And this, Bob Hope, he came to Belle Vue, did a little tour. What he's doing there is putting his hands and feet in concrete, not because the mafia were after him, but this was for the Wall of Fame, which was kept, some of you might remember the Wall of Fame, had the most amazing personalities in there. Bing Crosby came as well, you know, huge international stars to Manchester. And here you probably all recognize a very well-loved personality whose songs are still heard today, you know, Wish Me Luck as You Wave Me Goodbye. You recognize her? Gracie Fields. So Belle Vue was opened in 1836 by the Jennison family. There they are, looking very smart. Now the mother must have had her work cut out because they're all fellas, husband and all boys. But they ran Belle Vue really well. Admission to the gardens, which were open until 9 p.m. during the summer, was by subscription. So you had to pay an annual fee, and then you paid additional 10 shillings for a family and 5 shillings for an individual. So at the beginning, it was actually quite expensive, far beyond the means of most workers. They had concerts of genteel music and dancing on large open-air wooden platforms, and horse-drawn omnibuses were chartered to come from Piccadilly in central Manchester. In fact, I think we've got a horse-drawn. There we are. That's originally from Piccadilly to Belle Vue. The last departure time was about 6 p.m. So most workers' shifts ended then, so they didn't have a chance to go. Eventually, the first railway station was opened near Belle Vue in 1842, allowing workers easier access. By 1848, about 10 years after it had opened, it became much cheaper to come in, but in the press, there were reports that rough chaps in coarse attire were embarrassing middle-class ladies by forcibly attempting to dance with them. Look at this fella, this rough. There were also complaints about working-class men dancing together. So there was increasing resentment also from the working-class patrons about the forbidding dress requirements, the restricted opening hours, its unwelcoming admission price. Finally, the founder of the gardens, John Jennison, who was also known as Honest John, he is Honest John, he decided he's going to make it much easier for everybody to enjoy the gardens. His motto was, if you're no satisfied, I will you come no more, because I'm not about money. He actually was a brilliant entrepreneur, but however rich, he never forgot his roots. He was said to be a working man without even the rudiments of education. So he made the most important decision in the garden's history. Keep Belvale Gardens an exclusive, class-specific, genteel preserve for the gentry and the middle classes, or open it up to a popular crowd and allow them to arrive by the trains. And that's what he did. He actually reduced the prices down to as little as 4 pence, which was really, really wonderful. And to this day, of course, people still remember it as a wonderful, popular place for families. He was applauded by the people of Manchester for providing the cheapest day's amusement in the British Isles. And they never forgot the extreme poverty of those for whom it catered. They made very little money, and they made a very small charge for admission to the gardens and some for the catering, because some people were there for 5 hours. It was said that John Jennison and later his sons brought the wonders of the world to Manchester, and people flocked to see them. It was the playground of the poor, and he never encouraged the wealthy. John always said after that, 6pences and half crowns don't mix. So he only started out with a little tea room in a tiny thatched building in 1836 on a stretch of rough scrub and moorland. The nearest neighbours were in Ardwick Green, yet he made it one of the most famous attractions in the country, some say in the whole of Europe. There's a story of a commercial traveller in the 1870s asking a Worcestershire farmer if he'd been to Manchester, and the man replied he hadn't, but wasn't it somewhere near Belle Vue? So here you can see, that's more recent. As you can see here, it's been caught up by lots and lots of building. And at one time it would have been all fields surrounding it, but very, very good view of the Greyhound Stadium, the Showcase Cinema, and Gorton Park with the monastery there, of course, Gorton just nearby. It was very good for the people of Gorton because it provided a lot of extra income. John was born in 1793 in Nottinghamshire, the second son of John Jennison and Elizabeth Ives. His father was a cottage silk weaver. In 1826, he married Maria Barber, and they had 9 kids. Sadly, only the boys survived. John was a gardener, a jobbing gardener, and he soon created one of the most famous gardens in the country. and people used to come there, flock there to try his strawberries. And he first started a little zoo with a nest of young thrushes. I suppose city people didn't see many birds in those days. So he added cages after that of British birds, pheasants and macaws. Eventually he had monkeys. So here is his zoo. And it was quite a large kind of setup. And there's the entrance. This was a little bit later than when John started it, but some of you might still remember that. He started opening his gardens daily, and he added a brew house and a pub, and then he really did well. But by 1840s, unfortunately, he was nearly bankrupt. He just wasn't charging enough because he wanted everyone to enjoy it. But the bankruptcy people who were after him gave him a chance to another year or so to make a go of it. And he just got lots and lots of ideas from around America, later on from the Great Exhibition in London, and he started really creating more of an amusement park. And the greatest benefit to him was when Longsight Station opened up. I don't think Longsight Station is still open, but this actually gave a lot more impetus to the park. And then it helped him a lot when Higher Broughton Zoo closed down, which was the Manchester Zoo at the time in the centre. And he just rapidly expanded. And the zoo became immensely popular. He used to issue these kind of tokens. The lion was very popular as the attractions, and the elephant, of course, Maharaja. So you'd get these when you went to visit the zoo. And some people may still have them. If you have some at home, they'll probably be worth quite a lot. John and his wife were very different, but both brilliant. Described by their son, he said John was stubborn, hard, imperious, a ruler of men, full of ambitions, reckless of himself and fortune, a man of great wit and great ideas. Maria had no ideas outside her household duties, but her courage, mental and physical, was unbounded. And there's really an extraordinary story about Maria. You can see her here. She wasn't very tall, but there was a report in the newspapers that Maria found a leopard loose, and she single-handedly drove it back into its cage, just using her skirt and a stern eye. Now, those of you who might be retired teachers probably have a stern eye and know how useful that is. But anyway, look at this little lady. She just drove a leopard back into its cage. This trait of character was sharpened by the rough, harsh lessons of the school of poverty, and developed her natural carefulness into a determination to succeed by saving that made her almost a miser. She had a very quick temper and a biting tongue, and all the big lads that were her sons were scared of her and never took issue with anything she wanted to do. So she knew how to run a household. But it said that she exercised none of her bad arts on her husband. They were lovers through life and friendly companions on all holidays to the end. And her extreme carefulness helped her husband through many of his early troubles. Every penny that he made, he just chucked into developments as soon as it was earned. He had no reserves, and his wife had to go, they said, go a borrowing the weekly wages from her secret hoard in the mattress. Just like Ken Dodd, big secret hoard in the mattress. So here's the zoo brochure. One of the, probably the absolute original one, it was a penny, quite a lot of money, but beautifully printed, as you can see. And the lion's pride of place, as you can see, with the elephants in the middle. It is said that Honest John's finest and most courageous purchase was the elephant I mentioned earlier, the performing elephant Maharaja, which he bought for £840 from the Wombwell Zoo collection in Edinburgh. By 1900, all the animals were worth approximately £6,500, which is around £1 million in today's money. And he also had the most extraordinary sight by then. In 1871, there was 96 acres of the zoo, and over 2 million people visited annually. It was known as the showground of the world. And there were performers from all over the world, including from the Wild West. He had a regular Wild West show with people shooting each other up. And these were Native Americans he brought over. Can you imagine? It was the Barnum of Britain, wasn't he? Now, what surprised me with this picture is that there's a couple of these Native American chaps standing on the platform, and I was wondering why. Can anyone guess why they were standing on the bus? Well, from what I understood, it's because they didn't have a reservation. No, never mind. So, as I say, it was a huge, huge site, and John did fantastically well. But in the 1860s, he was forced to take a back seat to his sons when it came to the day-to-day running of Belle Vue. Unfortunately, he had cancer and he needed treatment. And then in 1869, he passed away, and he is here in Cheadle. If anyone's ever gone to the Cheadle Cemetery, that's John Jennison's magnificent tombstone. Well, in later years, Belle Vue enjoyed a brief post-war boom between the end of the Second World War and the early 1950s. During the early 60s, it could still attract 150 visitors on Easter Monday. Not a great picture, but you can see the massive people. And of course, you remember Bernard's films that he played earlier with the fun fair. Shows how much fun it was. So here, look at these people boarding buses. All boarding buses after a day out in Belle Vue. Amazing, isn't it? You can see right to the back, all the way to the great big tower, which I think you slid down on mats. So incredibly, incredibly popular. Here's the Easter Fair in 1961. Quite stylish then, weren't they? And here, another fun fair, and you can see another huge mass of people watching a little procession. Now that could have been the Whit Walk, which used to go up to Belle Vue for a while on a nice, nearly 3-mile walk from the town. In later years, Belle Vue enjoyed a brief post-war boom, as I said, but by the end of the decade, the figures had dropped down to about 30,000 a day. Still a huge number, but very different from 100,000 or more. There was lots of rival competition from other amusement parks, and eventually it was taken over by Leslie Joseph and Charles Forte in 1956. And they just put up with incredible problems, ever-present hazards, largely built out of wood, a lot of the structures, and the most devastating occurred in 1958. You'll remember from the film of the fire, which destroyed many, many buildings, including the famous Coronation Ballroom. There was also lots of vandalism and theft. You might have remember reading about that in the papers. Intruders killed 38 of the zoo's birds, including 9 penguins. Disgusting, wasn't it? In 1960s, they took on a lot more animals from other zoos that were closing down. There were hard times there. They almost ran out of food, and they had to experiment, which wasn't very good for the animals, unfortunately. Bananas were impossible to obtain. Supply of fish was really problematic. So the sea lions, they became casualties of the food shortage as they were fed with strips of beef soaked in cod liver oil, but their digestive systems couldn't cope. And the lion's diet was green-colored horse meat. Green-colored largely started in the Second World War when it was used for feeding pets, horse meat, and they didn't want butchers to pass it off, I guess, as beef or whatever. So they were given green-colored horse meat. The monkeys were fed on boiled potatoes. They couldn't believe their eyes. Earlier in its history, when the zoo had a full set of animal residents, Jennison had the idea of saving money on the huge requirements of food by promoting free entry for anyone who brought a cat for the Eagle's meal. Now, some people do suggest there's an overpopulation of cats in Chorlton, but I wouldn't dare say that myself. But anyway, in more recent times, there seemed to have been a more nutritious meal, which was provided by some members of the public, and it just makes you wonder how many free tickets they got for the baby, doesn't it? Birthdays were always remembered by the public, here with a cake for Nicholas the Hippo. Oh, and do you remember Bernard was saying about how health and safety unconscious they were. Just look at this little girl. She could have fallen in there, couldn't she? There were some awful incidents with the animals there at one time. Well, the birds of paradise didn't have millet, and the penguins didn't have fish, and eventually many succumbed. Vegetables were not in short supply because they grew them on site, and they always managed to provide the essentials. But the most important thing was entertainment catered for everyone. And here you can see a fine example coming up of how it catered both for dads and for kids. Everyone would have enjoyed this show, wouldn't they? I would say this is a peng win-win situation. And, you know, they seem to have broken the ice, don't they? Somebody told me this lady is the penguin's Antarctic. Oh well. News that Belle Vue Zoological Gardens would sadly close on 11th of September 1977 was announced on the BBC at 10 a.m. on the 4th of August 1977. 24 zookeepers were informed only an hour before. Lots of redundancy, sadly. The reason the company gave for closing the zoo was they could no longer afford to cover the losses of £100,000 a year. And shortly before the closure, a number of non-poisonous reptiles were stolen from the reptile house, only one of which, a 10-foot python, was recovered in, of all places, Liverpool. So it was also an end of an era when animals were taken more seriously and treated with a bit more dignity than like these were in the past. I understand these were probably the original PG chimps in terms of providing the inspiration for the adverts. Here, these two with the snakes were discovered hissing at the snakes. When they were asked what they were doing, they said, well, the snakes started it. Some Mancunians described the zoo in the press in the 1960s as a disgusting, heartless sideshow. They were also concerned for the safety of the children, since it was possible, believe this or not, possible for children to touch the animals in the wolf wood and in the big cat's enclosure. It's like Albert and the lion, isn't it? Here's Albert and his missus. It's awful, that, isn't it? Though you wouldn't treat animals like that now. Anyway, the park finally closed in 1982. Only the King's Hall, which opened in 1910, continued in use for professional wrestling and for huge numbers of dog owners who came to the hall so they could be styled to look just like their pets. That was a special treat for them. And there were, some of you may remember the King's Hall, as I mentioned earlier, on Saturday night to watch the wrestling, and then in the amusement park afterwards. So here's more people being styled like their pets. Wonderful, aren't they? The hall housed the Halle Orchestra for several years and hosted concerts by artists such as Jimi Hendrix, The Who, Johnny Cash, Led Zeppelin, and here you might remember Mick Jagger in the middle there with the Rolling Stones. The amusement park remained open on summer weekends until 1980, and it was a very popular stopover for wit walks. It's a tradition which, interestingly, actually started in Manchester on the 19th of July, 1821, when there was a procession of the children of Manchester to commemorate the coronation of George IV. The land was sold in 1982 and the site was finally cleared in 1987. All that remains of Belle Vue today is a Greyhound racing stadium where a lot of Mancunians went to the dogs. Opened in 1926 and finally paid to by national lockdown restrictions last August when it was formally closed. The animal rights campaigners were delighted as dogs were no longer, they said, suffering, but some fond memories remain. Now you can see this dodgy bookie here, and he'll probably always remember taking the last shilling earned by this poor chap's monkey. Look at the monkey looking at the money passing away. That monkey wasn't a very good gambler, by the way. Apparently, earlier on, he'd put a bet on at 10 to 1, but the dog didn't get in till 4 o'clock. Greyhound racing was introduced to Belle Vue in 1926 in the UK's first purpose-built Greyhound stadium, constructed at a cost of £22,000. Now it's owned by Crown Oil Pensions Fund and leased back to the Greyhound Racing Association, but the fight is lost now and it's closed down. So we can see some of the retired greyhounds. By the way, the people who wanted to carry on with this say that these greyhounds have a little pension pot from their winnings, which keeps them going in their retirement. And they also make lovely pets for anybody looking to rescue a dog. One of the most famous activities synonymous with Belle Vue was Speedway, known as dirt track racing, and this is where it took place. First started in 1928, and that's when they converted the old 1887 athletics ground into the Speedway Stadium. It was the largest purpose-built speedway in the country, possibly in the world. Eventually the home of Belle Vue Aces, and also used for lots of other things like football, cricket, rugby league, baseball, stock car racing. There was accommodation there for 40,000 spectators. During the Second World War, the Speedway bikes ran on wood alcohol. I don't know if anyone knows what that is. That was called dope, alcohol made from wood. So it wasn't affected by the war. Eventually, Belle Vue sold the stadium in 1982, but it continued. The last stock car race was in 1987, before it was demolished, probably by the stock car. Near the end, Belle Vue had the distinction of being the spiritual home of the iconic British Open Brass Band Championship. The first brass band competition was launched by Honest John in 1853 and only ended in 1982, when the last concert took place there, a very long time. Now, one attraction most people were itching to see was run by Professor Len Tomlinson in the 60s and 70s. He operated one of the UK's last flea circuses in a small booth on the amusement park. The attraction consisted of harnessed human fleas racing chariots at the rate of an inch every few seconds, pulling a garden roller, riding a tricycle, and even fencing with little pins stuck in pieces of cork in a semblance of a sword fight. Now, they did very well for a while, until one day a stray dog got into the show and unfortunately stole the show. Now, fleas make very good performers, as they're some of the best jumpers in nature due to elastic cuticles made of something called resilin. So this allows them to charge up energy and release it in a split second. They have exceptionally strong back legs if they're human fleas. So human fleas were the best. And of course, for many, many years, there was an abundance of them. And because they drink human blood, all the professor had to do was roll up his sleeve, stick him on his arm, they had a nice drink, and then they lasted for weeks after that in tip-top condition. But of course, with improvements in domestic living conditions, human fleas became more difficult to obtain. Now, I understand that there is an attempt to recreate the circus, to bring it all back. So if any of you have any spare fleas, can you please let us know at the end, and we'll arrange for them to be picked up from you. Here we have open air dancing, which was the very first thing that started at Belle Vale off, and traditionally has been very, very popular. Mancunians love dancing, and some of the best dancers in the world came from here. And it all really started in Belle Vue in 1847. Half an acre wooden platform, and the first indoor ballroom in the north, which was 60 foot long and 25 foot wide, was opened up there. So really, really popular. The most popular dance from the very beginning was the polka. It was all the rage. There were polka jackets, bonnets, even polka cigars, even a song that went, "Oh, sure, the world is all run mad. The lean, the fat, the gay, the sad, all swear such pleasure they never had till they did learn the polka." And then the way you do the polka, in case anybody wants to learn it, is first, according to the song, cock up your right leg so, balance on your left great toe, stamp your heels, and off you go. So that's what was happening at Belle Vue in the early 1900s. Now, these were the kind of menus they had there, and they had specials. There was a special 1 shilling and threepence, 1 shilling and sixpence, and for that you would have quite a lot, you know, for a shilling: baked beans and chips, a pot of tea, white or brown bread, peaches and cream, or bananas and cream. And if you paid the extra, you got scrambled eggs, cold ham, or ox tongue, or cold pressed beef. So they dined quite well there, didn't they? In the 1920s and 30s, tea dances were the most popular, usually in the coronation ballroom or in the small rooms of the hotel. And of course, they needed sandwiches and cake to keep them going. It was popular, really, Belle Vue, because traditionally, right through its history, it was cheaper to get in than places like the Piccadilly Dance Salon. By 1955, Manchester Evening News said more people go dancing on a Saturday night than go to football matches. When you consider the great footballing history of Manchester, that's incredible, isn't it? Dancing was very popular. In 1957, the owners of Belle Vue decided to convert an old stable block near the Bob's roller coaster into the Bavarian banqueting suite, and they spent £30,000 just on the maple flooring for the dancers. Here's another famous chap. If you can look at a poster to the right, you can see he came to Manchester. He, of course, was old Satchmo, Louis Armstrong, and he chose Manchester as one of the stops. Incredibly famous man, of course. He's a world famous chap. He made lots and lots of Hollywood films, and he used to sing a lot with people like Bing Crosby. So Manchester loved jazz and swing music, and the owners of Belle Vue managed to get hold of Louis Armstrong. And then they had rock and roll, bands like Bill Haley and the Comets, Buddy Holly and the Crickets, singers like Fats Domino, Gene Vincent, the Everly Brothers. They all came to Manchester's Belle Vue. Here you can see teddy boys dressed up in their Edwardian costume. And as you can see, they're nice Manchester lads, probably Sunday school teachers in their spare time and members of the Boys Brigade. But when they were in Belle Vue, sadly, they were often picked upon, terribly picked upon, by teddy boys from other areas like Liverpool, and they often had fights there, which is awful, isn't it? But it had a reputation for being a bit rowdy. Maybe because, as I said, it was cheaper to get in than the Piccadilly Dance Salon and other places, and they didn't always behave themselves. So these teddy boys were up to no good. Elizabethan banqueting suite opened, one of the largest ballrooms in Europe, probably the largest in England, with 60,000 square feet and over 3,800 dancers. So you would enter into the Elizabethan ballroom, if you remember, I mentioned, via the Wall of Fame. And here's another picture of the very popular singer Davy Jones, who was also on Coronation Street, one of the monkeys, and he's signing his little concrete foot there. In May 1963, possibly, some say the most famous disco in the world in its time and nightclub was a Top 10 club. And this was open in the Elizabethan ballroom. Here you can see a little poster of it. It was hosted at the time by an unmentionable chap, who was quite a popular DJ on television. You can see his name there on the left. But it was very, very popular. And people were desperate to get in. In fact, they would get up to all sorts. And we have a lovely story, a true story from a Manchester man who was 12 years old, who in great Manchester tradition of entrepreneurial skill and hard work and initiative, he managed to get in. And Bernard's kindly going to read his story. Bernard's not that far off from being a teenager, are you, Bernard? You remember what that was like?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nakib. It's been really, really interesting there. You've got a few slides to go after this, haven't you? So I'll keep the slides on the screen. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, we'll do that, yes.
Yeah.
The people entering.
We've had several comments about the jokes, mostly very complimentary.
Mostly.
Well, jokes, yeah, maybe they are. Anyway, this was from somebody who was 12 years old. I remember waiting for my membership card to arrive. I was 12 years old, but big for my age. I can remember standing in line and handing in my membership card and being asked for my date of birth. I put it on the application, a date that made me just 17. My heart pounded as the biggest bouncer I'd ever seen looked me in the eyes and wished me happy birthday. I was in. We looked around us, soon found the soda fountain on the ground floor, and I had a Coke over crushed ice. It was like being in a film set to us. We'd only thought things like this existed in America. As the place filled up, we walked on the dance floor and soon joined in doing shaking all over. I remember running like mad to catch the last 125 bus to get home to Hollingsworth. I knew that night I was going to go every week, but the cost was a big problem. I got 2 and 6 pocket money, and the ticket that had been that week had been 3 and 6. The bus fares and cake and cigs had put costs up to over £1. I needed money. But the only part-time work going around our way was only for over 14-year-olds. So that week I applied for 2 paper rounds and a part-time job as a butcher's boy. After all, I passed as 17, so age wasn't going to be a bar to getting anything I wanted. To my amazement, I got all the jobs, so it was let the good times roll. Well, on a Sunday night anyway. Then my dad told me I could only keep staying out late on a Sunday night if I did better at school. So I used part of the money to pay the butcher's wife, she was a teacher, to help me with the 3 R's, and soon I moved up at school. From that first week, I never missed a single Sunday at the top 10 club for years. I had some fab nights and met some super friends at the club. I honestly think that the top 10 club changed my life for the better.
Isn't that brilliant? This lad gets 3 jobs so he can do it, and he does it so honestly and industriously. Marvellous, wasn't it? So, well, this is the monument. If you go to Belle Vue to state what was there, 1836 to 1977, monument to humans and animals, marks the gateway to the gardens, world famous fun fair, speedway, wrestling, many more attractions. So it was really cheap holiday flights, everyone getting more expensive tastes, growing consumer desire for change, and Belle Vue just became more and more decrepit, sadly. So nothing left but this lovely monument. But here you can see some of the families from the 60s who enjoyed it. You know, it's really, Belle Vue is really about the people who made Manchester such a great city, forward-thinking, generous, community-spirited, and it's delighted Mancunians, many visitors from all over the country, even worldwide, for over 150 years. It's an amazing legacy of fun and goodwill, and thousands of local people worked there, entertained there, spent the best times of their lives in the grounds and shows, and many even helped Belle Vue when it was struggling through the wars and rough times, many giving what they could as part of its wonderful community. Here there's a little girl who actually gave her little pet duck to the zoo. And as special recognition for the historic wonderland of Manchester, Her Majesty the Queen made a special trip to Belle Vue on a royal visit to Manchester in 1961, here planting a flag with Major Shart, a Manchester man. She inspected troops in the showground, planted the flag, and very much a Manchester story. So here, I thought I'd put the words of Manchester Judge Edward Abbott Parry, who was a playwright, and he was also a lawyer, and he knew Belle Vue well, and he described Belle Vue in Manchester as the place where people do things, don't just talk about what they're going to do, they do it. Manchester has energy and freedom, and the right to do and to think without shackles, and that's it. It's all over now. You can reflect on the jokes.
Okay. Well,
thank you, Nakib.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see everybody soon.
Bye, everyone. Bye.